you for the invitation to come here to speak about the Energy Efficiency Directive. Thank you to the Minister of Economics and to the Danish Embassy. It's a big pleasure for me here to be here and present something on the new EU directive. I have been working with energy policy and energy issues for the last 30 years. And for the last 15 years, I have worked especially with end-use energy efficiency. Last year, I was a member of the Danish team on the Danish presidency on the negotiation of the Energy Efficiency Directive. So I was very strongly involved in the whole process in Brussels under that period. So I used a lot of my time on that. But I'm also strongly involved in implementation in Denmark. So that's some of my background. I will first here speak a bit about the importance of energy efficiency in general, and then I will come to the Energy Efficiency Directive and its main requirements. We have some long-term energy objectives, and I have set them up here in 3 points. First one is that we have to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. EU has a target that the emission of greenhouse gases should be reduced by 80 to 95% in 2050. So it's quite important and quite strong requirements. We have to improve energy security. We see that in our business as usual forecast for the whole EU, the share of oil and gas which we import from abroad are increasing. So we have to go and do something about it. Elsewhere, we will be more and more dependent of resources coming from the Middle East and from Russia. So it's an important point to work with. And we have to improve the competitiveness of our economy, create growth and create new jobs. And in Denmark, we have defined a strategy and a long-term goal that the only way to fulfill all these 3 elements is to be independent of fossil fuels in 2050. Have an energy sector which are based only on renewable energy. And there's only 2 ways to do that. One is to improve our energy efficiency quite dramatically, use less energy. As a part of improving efficiency, we also have to do electrification. A lot of our heating, where the houses outside the cities, which today are heated by oil, have to be heated by heat pumps and so on. We have to use much more electrical cars in the transport sector. So energy efficiency, 1 point. Second point is more use of renewable and other clean energy sources. And that's the way to fulfill the long-term objectives. And why is energy efficiency so important also in the short term? Today there's a lot of studies available worldwide showing that energy efficiency is the cheapest, biggest and fastest way to fulfill our objectives. The technologies which we have to use to improve efficiency in the building sector, in industries, are already there. Some of the technologies which we have to use on the supply side, especially if you go into carbon capture and storage for power plants, but also some of the more advanced renewable technology, are still not commercial on the market. So end-use energy efficiency, we can start now. We can do it here immediately. The figure here is from IEA's last World Energy Outlook, showing that a huge share of their scenarios, going from what they call the new policy scenario, which are the baseline with the policy which member states globally has in place today, to the 450 ppm scenarios. It's where what is needed to the global temperature should not raise more than 2%, 2 degrees. So that was what the global leaders agreed on in Copenhagen on the COP15. One of the few things they really agreed on was that the global temperature should not increase more than 2 degrees Celsius. And if we should go that, we should stabilize the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere at 450 ppm. And if we should go to that scenario, IEA has calculated that, and you can see that up to 60% of what we have to do is coming from energy efficiency. So energy efficiency is really important. We also know that there is a very big cost-effective potential which are untapped. IEA also in World Energy Outlook, and that is on a global scale, but I think the figures are almost the same in a European perspective. You can see that in the business as usual, the new policy scenario, there only between 20 and 40% of the potentials are realized. So there's still a lot to do. And you can see in the building sector, only 20% of the cost-effective potential will be realized until 2035 in the business as usual. We have 80% out there we have to go for. And as Julia said just before, this can create growth. IEA in the last World Energy Outlook here came out in October also has this figure. I'm not so sure that your friends in Russia would be so happy about it. But in the rest of the world, you can see that implementing these energy efficiency potentials will create growth in the global economy in average. And especially it will create growth in all parts of the world except Russia and the Middle East, which are the rest of the world here. Of course, we use less oil when we do energy efficiency and less gas. And of course, that has an influence on them. But this is a way to create growth and to create jobs. When the European Commission calculated the benefits of the Energy Efficiency Directive, they also found that the new directive in 2020 would create 400,000 new jobs in Europe. Over the whole period, around 2 million jobs. What was the background for the new Energy Efficiency Directive? Yeah, this was a 20% saving target, which was decided of head of states in 2007 as a part of the 2020 EU energy policies. And we have taken, at a European level, several new initiatives since then. We have the EU Building Directive, EPBD. There has been a recast. It has been strengthened. There has been a lot of work by setting energy efficiency requirements for products and appliances under the eco-design, labeling of products. All of these are very important. It delivers a lot of savings. We have had the Energy Service Directive, which were quite weak, but it was also, by new studies in 2009, clear that EU was not on track to meet the 20% target. The figure here down illustrates that by the policy in place by end of 2009, EU would only reach 9% of savings, not 20%. Less than half. So there was a need to do more. There was then a discussion in 2010, 2011 in relation to an energy efficiency plan. What was the policy options? And the first policy option was, of course, to setting binding energy efficiency target. You know that the CO2 targets are binding for member states. The renewable target are binding for member states. The energy efficiency target was an indicative target for EU as such and was not distributed for member states. It was not binding. But member states was against to setting binding targets. So that was not the way forward. The other option was to setting binding measures. And that was chosen by the Commission in their proposal. And of course, the binding measures should deliver on the 20% target. It has to be new additional measures, additional to the measures which already was in place at EU and member states level. It was also quite clear that we had to act quickly if we should reach our 20% target in 2020. 2020 is not far away. If we should implement new policies which should have effect in 2020, it was necessary to act quite quickly. The priorities for the Danish presidency, first, we saw that the proposal was published by Commission in June 2011. We took over the presidency 1st of January 2012. And the Parliament, European Parliament, started their work on the directive already in July 2011. And that was important. the Polish presidency, which were in second half in 2011, they also start up the work and made a very good work and progress. So when we took over in 1st of January 2012, the Parliament was working hard on this dossier, and the Polish president has taken the first step. So there was a good playing ground for our work after that. European Parliament, just to say, there was more than 1,800 amendments for the directive in European Parliament. So it was a very, very complicated and hard work for them. They managed to conclude their proposal of their view in end of February 2012, and the 1,800 amendments was brought down to 15, which all groups in Parliament almost decided on and supported. So they were clear for negotiations. The Danish objective or perspective or mandate going into this was, as a presidency, you have to listen to member states. The role of the presidency is to find compromise, to be a moderator. And of course, that was also our perspective. But we also had a perspective that we want to keep the ambitious level up there. If the directive should be meaningful, it has to be a tool to fulfill the gap to reach the target. A weak directive which we're not delivering was not useful. And we also had tried to set quite ambitious. We have to find a political agreement on this before end of June, before our presidency period was over. And we managed to do that, and I think we can say that the results was quite good, but there was also a lot of hard work, not only from our side, but from a lot of groups in Parliament and from member states. So we pushed quite hard. What is the Energy Efficiency Directive on? You could say it's a directive which covers the whole energy chain. And now we have withdrawn both the Energy Service Directive, with a few exemptions, and the CSP directives. So now it's everything in here. And it's also a very complex directive with a lot of articles. And there are several reasons that this directive are complex. One is that measuring savings or efficiency is quite complicated. It's much easier to measure renewable energy. You can just measure how much has you produced. Here you very often have to measure to compare to some kind of baseline. You have to measure something you are not using, and that's not so easy. The directive is also ending up to be quite complex because member states are very different and have very different views. So we had to find ways where all the different views and possibilities was included. So that's made it very complex. But it's also clear that the directive can deliver, but only if member states implement the different requirements and do it properly and ambitious. And under negotiations, there were member states saying, we can only support the directive if we can fulfill the requirements by the measures we already have in place. But if that is the view of member states, we will not close the gap and reach the 20% target. We need to do more, all of us. What is the main requirements? Yeah, the minister has already covered them, so I think I can do it very quickly. But the most important requirements which deliver the biggest part of impact from the directive is the Article 7 in the directive on energy efficiency obligation schemes. This is an obligation which member states can put on distributors or retail sale companies. The obligation should be equal to annual savings of 1.5% of sales, where the sales for transport sector are excluded. The article also says that member states can choose alternatives with similar effect. So there's a lot of flexibility here. But if member states choose alternatives, they have to prove that for the Commission. We have two requirements related to buildings. They are a supplement to what you can say are in the EU building directive already. One is for the public building sector, or in fact, it ended not to be the public building sector, only for central government buildings. And that's one of the problems, is to define what is central governments. And that's very different between member states, from federal states and so on, lot of discussions. But they have to renovate 3% of the area of central government buildings every year. But also here, there's possibility to choose alternatives approach, flexibility. And the parliament then was very strong that we have also to have a focus on long-term renovation strategies, and that has been included in the final directive for the building sector. The directive has requirements for the energy audits and energy management, and for the building sector, most countries already have that in place as part of the EU's building directive. The really new thing is the mandatory requirements for the big industries to have energy audits and energy management made on a regular basis. There's several requirements on metering and billing on energy consumption, and we here have it important when we do smart metering, intelligent metering, that these meters also give benefit to the end-use consumers, help the end-use consumers to save energy, not only give benefit to the suppliers. And then we have the whole part that member states should develop efficiency in heating and cooling. It's very much about heat planning, development of district heating, and CHP. So we have been working very hard with that in Denmark for the last 25, 30 years. So our potential has almost fulfilled there. But we have also, and that was one of the main reasons that we have been able to keep our energy consumption stable, even we have had quite good economic growth. I will not go over this one, just to show that it's a very comprehensive directive with the different articles. Yeah, you cannot see that first column is the number of the articles, and the second is the aims, so because of the colors up there. But you see that member states should set indicative target, building renovation, energy efficiency obligation, purchasing of energy efficiency products, and so on. There's also a lot of requirements on qualification, accreditation, and certification schemes, information and training, energy service, and so on. Very comprehensive directive covering everything. I've been asked to say a few words about how will that influence the public and industrial sector. And for the public sector, in Denmark, the energy consumption in public buildings, in the public sector, are 6-7% of total energy consumption. So the public sector as an energy consumer are not so important if you just look at the share of total energy consumption. But the public sector is important because it can show the good example. And it is a very big purchasing power of when buying in new products and new buildings. They can help to develop the markets. So it is important that the public sector show the good examples. And we have two main requirements here. The one is, which I have already mentioned, the 3% renovation rate of central government buildings, and where alternatives approach are possible. And the Article 6 on energy efficiency purchasing. And it's both on products, buildings, and services. So that's has to be implemented in national laws. Finally, the public sector can also benefit from the energy efficiency obligations if that are implemented in member states. We see that the public sector in Denmark use the obligation for which we have quite extensively. For the industrial sector, we have seen in Denmark, and I think that's true in general, there is still a huge cost-effective efficiency potential in industries, even in quite big energy industry companies. So we have to work with that area and have to take that seriously. And the main requirements in the directive is Article 8 on energy efficiency audits. We have had energy efficiency audits in Denmark, especially started up in the 90s. Today we have more and more transformed it over to working with energy management. That's then that require that the companies working with energy efficiency and follow their energy efficiency on a regular basis by implementing an energy management system. And as a part of the energy management system, you will normally also do energy audits. So we think that's quite effective strategy, which can often deliver savings on 10-15%. So that's a good approach to work with that. The industry can really benefit from the energy efficiency obligations. The energy efficiency obligation, which Richard Schalborg will present later on here from Denmark, more than 60%, up to 60% of the savings under these obligations are found in industry companies. So there is because the savings are cheapest and easiest to find today. So there's really a possibility. What was the result then of the directive? Will the directive bring us to the 20%? And not completely. You can see here from the figure that the policies which were in place by end of 2009, the blue one here, that will bring us up to 9%. The energy efficiency directive by itself will bring us to more than 15%, but there's also new measures on the transport sector that will bring us up to around 17%. So we still miss the last 3% to go to the 20% saving target. But there is possibilities, and EU are working with stronger and better requirements on energy, on products and appliances, on the eco-design, and that will help to that. And we also have to recognize that our bad economic situation will make it more easily to reach the 20% target. It has been much more difficult to reach the 20% saving target if we have had high economic growth. Few words about implementation and timetables. I have already mentioned that the proposal was presented by Commission. The directive was finally adopted in October 2012. It went into force in December, and it has to be implemented by member states by 5th of June 2014. There was given a 18 months timetable for implementation in general, but there is a few elements which has to be implemented before. So quite hard work to do, and for member states, and then the Commission will monitor progress in 2014, and based on that, they can come back and they can also consider binding target again if we are not on track. To conclude, energy efficiency are very important, and I would also try to make it clear that in general we have to do energy efficiency first. When we change our energy supply of our building or factory from using oil or gas to district heating or to biomass or heat pump, we first have to see, are the energy use efficient? We should not start building a new biomass power plant and then reduce consumption afterwards, because then the biomass plant will be too big, oversized. So reduce consumption first and then find alternative way to produce from go away from oil and gas and so on. So take it in the right order. Second point, the Energy Efficiency Directive is an obligation for member states. I very often hear that this creates obligation for industries. And no, the directive has no direct obligation for industries. It's an obligation for member states. That's EU regulation. And they need to do more. It should not be seen as a burden. This is cost effective. That can create jobs. It should be seen as an opportunity. And there is a lot of flexibility inside the directive. So member states has the possibility to implement in a way which are best for them. Finally, we are looking by the directive until 2020. But 2020 is only the first step. And EU are now in a process of discussing what should the target be for 2030 on a way to reach our long-term 2050 goals. And by that, energy efficiency will be even more important. Thank you.
Thank you, paldies. Ir jautājumi, komentāri? Jā, lūdzu, Ingūna. Jā, es tūdaļ mikrofonu.
Paldies, Pēter, par izsmeļošo prezentāciju. Man prieks jūs redzēt Rīgā, ne tikai Briselē. Un mans jautājums ir par direktīvas 7. pantu. Ko jūs varētu ieteikt, ja Latvija izvēlēsies šo ceļu mūsu kompānijām energoapgādes, kā strādāt ar patērētājiem, jo šis ietaupījums ir jāiegūst gala patēriņā? Ko viņiem darīt?
First, I will say that from a Danish perspective, we see 3 good reasons to give energy efficiency obligation for energy companies. One is that create a system or energy actors or energy service providers which help consumers to implement. And these actors, the companies, energy companies, are available all over the country. So we will secure a good coverage of all kinds of consumers in the whole country. Secondly, it's a good way to finance activities. Even in Denmark, financing energy efficiency activities over the state budget are very, very difficult these days. By putting the obligation on the energy companies, you will finance the activities over the tariffs, not over the state budget, not over the taxes. Of course, it's the consumer who pay, but it is much easier to finance it over the tariffs, and it's much more stable. It will not be a question for discussion every year in Parliament when they decide on the state budget. And thirdly, I think we have, over the coming years, look into how can we transform the energy sector from just selling energy to the lowest cost per kilowatt hour to be a sector who selling energy services have a focus to reduce the energy consumer's energy bill. And the bill is a function of how much you use and the price of the unit you use. And you can very often reduce the bill much more by using less instead of going out to the market and buy a bit cheaper. So the companies has to do that. And we have seen then, how can the energy companies help end-use consumers to do energy efficiency savings? Yeah, but they can do that in different ways. Of course, one way is to give them a subsidy. So very often in Denmark, we see more and more that the companies, what they do, approach the company, the end-use consumer in industry and households, say, we will give you a subsidy. But they can also do consulting, advice, organizing, implementation, so it's much easier for end-use consumer to do that. But I think maybe Richard Talbot will come more into that in his presentation.
My name is Juris Golnovs. I also got a comprehensive training course last decade in the project of Danish Energy Authority. And my question is the following. How do you plan to balance improvement of building energy efficiency with combined heat and power efficiency in district heating system?
First, when we look at renovation of buildings, we have to recognize that buildings has a very long lifetime. And it's our experience that it is almost always cost effective to improve the efficiency when you do renovation anyway. If the roof has to be changed, and you can say the average lifetime on a roof is maybe 50, 60 years, depending on what kind of roof you have. When you have to change the roof because the roof are broken, the water is running through and so on, then you have to improve the insulation quite up to best standard. And if you don't do it at that time, you will have to wait 60 years to do it again. So it's very, very important to secure when you do something, do it properly and do it deep. The same, you could say, by windows and heating system inside the buildings. Second point is, we will see in Denmark quite dramatically change in our production of district heating over the coming 20 years. Because when we have to get rid of use of fossil fuels, coal, gas, oil, then we will have less combined heat and power production. We will, of course, have some combined heat and power production from waste and from biomass, but much less. Some of the scenarios shows that in the end, 50% of our district heating will come from heat pumps. That's fitting very well with our wind, because we will have a huge production of electricity from wind turbines. And then you can storage the wind in the district heating system. So it's working well. But we have to reduce and do insulation even in buildings, even if they are supplied by district heating.
Gads Ābel, Ekonomikas ministrija. Jautājums ir joprojām Dānijas pārstāvim par ēkām. Un mēs zinām, ka abas direktīvas paredz pietiekam ambiciozus mērķus ēku gala patēriņā un tā skaitā jaunu būvniecības standartu, jeb šo normu noteikšanu dalību valstīs. Un mans jautājums Dānijas pārstāvim ir, kāds ir Dānijā vidējais šobrīd patēriņa līmenis ēkās, dzīvojamās ēkās, un vai Dānijai ir bijusi pieredze šo minimālo prasību harmonizācijai vai nu Ziemeļu valstīs vai ar atsevišķām Eiropas Savienības dalību valstīm. Tas būtu ļoti interesanti arī uzzināt no mūsu perspektīvas, ka šobrīd mēs gatavojam izstrādāt un ieviest šos jaunas būvniecības normas. Paldies!
First, to the last question, comparing requirements for new buildings between member states are quite difficult because climate are different, standards are set in different ways, and so on. So it is very, very difficult. We have in Denmark we have the building codes, which we call the 2010 building codes, where we have strengthened quite dramatically. We have already published the building code, which will go into force by 2015, where we will strengthen 25% again. And then we have also published what we think will be the near zero energy building code for 2020 or 2018 for public building. And that will bring us down to 20 kilowatt hours per square meter for new buildings for the 2020, around 50 for 2015. And that's in Denmark we set that as a requirement for the energy which should be delivered to the building for covering heating and hot water, and for instill permanent electricity consumption for pumps and so on, not for electricity consumption for appliances are not included. And I think by these we are at least between the best countries, but it is very difficult to compare between because they are formulated so different. The average consumption for existing building stock households in Denmark is about 130, 140 kilowatt hours per square meter at that level.